Hey everyone, my name is Dylan Adams, and I think it's safe to say that slide guitar is a challenging technique to pull off. It takes a lot of subtlety and finesse to do it right and make it sound good. It can take years to get the hang of it, and a lot of people struggle with it. That being said, there are certain things you can do and certain changes you can make right now to immediately improve your slide playing. So that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. I'm going to give you guys 5 tips that you can try out right now that will make your slide playing better right away. So let's just get right into it. Tip number 1 is get a slide that fits. Now, I realize that this technically isn't something you can do immediately because most people are going to have to either order a new slide online or go to the store and try some out. But as soon as you do get a slide that fits you properly, you will notice an immediate improvement. Regardless of which finger you choose to put the slide on and what material of slide you choose to use, having a slide that is either too small and snug or especially too big and cumbersome is seriously going to limit your slide playing. If the inner diameter of your slide is too small and it stops, say, before the second knuckle right here like this, then the slide's probably going to feel uncomfortable for you, and it has the potential to have the slide kind of come at the strings at a weird angle like this, sort of like tilted forward, and it's just generally going to give you less control over the slide. Or if you have a slide that's too big like this one is on me, I'm a pinky finger slide player, so this is definitely too large for this finger here. If I was a ring finger slide player, then this would actually fit perfect, but this is definitely too big on my pinky. There's just way too much wiggle room in there. And if you have a slide that's too big like this, it's going to feel heavy, cumbersome. You're going to be more likely to accidentally fret out or push the string all the way down to the frets like this. And it's just going to lessen your dexterity because, again, it's just heavy and cumbersome and harder to move around. And it's just forcing you to constantly think about keeping the slide secure on your finger so it doesn't fall off or slip down or anything like that. Ideally, you shouldn't have to think about the slide at all while you're using it. It should just be an extension of you so you can just focus on getting your ideas out with it. So what I would recommend for a properly fitting slide is to find one that fits around your finger in a way that I would call not quite snug. Just to give you a reference point as to what that actually means, I would define a fully snug slide as being one where the entire 360 degrees of that inner wall of the slide fully touches your entire finger all the way around, and maybe even squeezes it a little bit to where it actually feels tight on your finger. And so for a not quite snug slide, instead of the slide completely squeezing your finger like this so it's immobile, there's going to be just the tiniest little bit of wiggle room in there. And I really mean just a little bit of wiggle room. Like I'm talking probably a 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter of room around your finger from the inner wall of the slide. That type of fit is perfect because the slide is nice and secure on your finger. There's not a ton of wiggle room for the slide to kind of flop around, but it's also loose enough that you can move your finger around in there just a little bit so it's not uncomfortable. Once you find that perfect fit, it just gives you so much more control over what you're doing. And it makes it easier to switch between slide and normal fretted playing as well because you don't have to worry about the slide shifting position on your finger or just falling off. So how do you find your perfectly fitting slide? Well, honestly, you're just gonna have to try a bunch of them out. One thing that can help if you're ordering online is to measure the width of your finger going across this way, and then try to find a slide that has an inner diameter that is as close to 1 millimeter larger than your finger measurement as possible. Lastly, when it comes to the length of your slide, this is a little bit less crucial, but a general good rule of thumb to follow is if you want to play a lot of full 6-string chords, like across all 6 strings with an open tuning, for example, then go with the slide that is about the width of your fretboard, if not slightly wider. Whereas if you are mostly focusing on just playing single note stuff or just, small chords like only 3 to 4 strings at a time, then you can get one that's a little bit shorter, but I would still recommend getting one that can at least cover around 4 strings at the same time. So that's tip number 1, get a slide that fits. Now, before we move on, really briefly, I just wanted to talk about the main thing that supports me and my channel, which is my guitar video courses. First of all, if you saw my video last week where I announced that I'm doing a site-wide sale for 1 week only, well, I've decided to extend that sale for 1 more week. So if you thought you missed out on the sale, you actually have until Sunday, October 26th, 2025. I currently have 2 video courses that I've released, which are my standard tuning slide course and my fretting behind the slide course. And just last week, I launched the Modern Slide Guitar Bundle, which is both of those courses together in one discounted package. And on top of that already discounted price, you can get the bundle for 50% off, like I said, until Sunday, October 26th, 2025. Or if you just want to get one of the courses individually, then you can get those for 35% off. Links to check out my courses and the course bundle are in the description down below. All right, let's get back to the video. So tip number 2 is have correct slide hand positioning. Now with this, there is a little bit of an element of personal preference and just your hand anatomy. And I've seen some famous players who use kind of, different hand positionings and things like that. But in my opinion, there is one type of hand positioning that is just objectively better than the others. And that is this. So always have your wrist nice and straight. So you don't want to have your hand like this or anything. Always have a nice and straight wrist there. From there, bend your fingers slightly so the slide is nice and level with the strings. And then just bring your hand to the fretboard and put the slide down nice and flat on the strings. And lastly, the most important thing is to have your thumb positioned in the center of the back of the neck, like this. This is the position you want to have your thumb in pretty much 100% of the time when you're playing slide. So you want to have the pad of your thumb right here resting on the back of the neck, the center of the back of the neck. So not the tip of your thumb, you don't want to have it out like this, just pad of your thumb, center of the back of the neck. So basically you do not want to have your thumb wrapped over or wrapped underneath the fretboard like this. So not over, not under, always in the middle of the back of the neck. The reason why that's the best position is it just gives you by far the most control while also allowing you to have the most fluidity while you're playing slide. Having your thumb wrapped over the top of the fretboard like this is very restricting when you're trying to play slide. It's just very awkward and stiff. And then on the flip side, if you have your thumb underneath the neck like this, it's just way too loose and out of control feeling. It may not feel as restrictive as having your thumb over like this, but having your thumb under just doesn't allow you to really anchor to anything. Your hand is just kind of floating around in space out here and really reduces your control over the slide. Everything just ends up being kind of warbly and lacking in precision when you're playing this way. With this kind of positioning, you can technically anchor your thumb to the bottom of the fretboard here, but it still doesn't give you as much control as having the proper thumb positioning. Having your thumb in the center of the back of the neck positioning really gives you the best of both worlds. It feels nice and solid and secure, and you have a lot of control over what you're doing with the slide, so you can be way more precise with it. And because you have this one anchor point right here, but overall a more kind of relaxed hand positioning, it allows you to loosen up your hand when you want to for things like vibrato or just getting kind of like looser, raunchier, bluesy type sounds. So basically it allows you to be fast and precise when you need to be, and loose and flowy when you need to be. Of course, regardless of your hand positioning, it's still going to take a lot of practice to be able to play things like that with the slide. But if you're using one of those other two kind of less proper positions, then you will notice an improvement when you switch to this thumb on the back of the neck positioning. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. So this one's going to be kind of an extension of tip number 2. Now that we have our correct hand positioning, what you have to do to really harness it and get the most out of it is this. Keep your thumb anchored and move your hand around it. Let me explain what I mean. So when I was playing this kind of stuff a second ago, kind of a faster, snappier line like that, let me show you what that looks like from another angle. I'll do that one more time slower so you can really see what's going on there. Notice how my thumb does not move from this spot on the neck for the entire duration of that lick. Rather than keeping my hand locked in this position the whole time and moving the whole thing back and forth like this, I'm keeping my thumb in one spot and kind of doing more like this, rotating my hand around my thumb. So instead of this, you get more of this. What that's doing is always providing a consistent point of stability as I move through this lick, and it's allowing me to move precisely from one note to the next because I have that consistent reference point. If I'm just moving my hand back and forth like this, it really isn't that much different from just having my thumb under here like this because I don't really have a reference point to get from one note to the next. It's just kind of floating around. Whereas when I have my thumb planted like this with enough time and practice, I kind of just know how far I need to move my hand up in relation to where my thumb is to get to the next note. So it allows me to have more precise intonation by having a reference point in any given position that I'm playing in. If I try to play that same lick without that kind of solid anchor point, then it sounds more like this. compared to... It just allows for a lot more control and just kind of snappiness and just precision when you're playing anything, honestly. It doesn't have to be just single string lines like that. It can be any of your kind of like Dwayne Elmore James type stuff too, like this. Even positional stuff like that where you're crossing strings, it still applies. And of course, as you can see there, I am moving my thumb to different spots for different kind of areas of these licks here, but I'm only doing it when I'm kind of moving to a different position on the neck. So if I'm staying in this kind of area right here, then my thumb doesn't move. But as soon as I'm down there in that position, my thumb stays anchored again in this new position. And lastly, it also helps your vibrato as well because again, you have that kind of solid anchor point by which you can kind of loosen the rest of your arm and hand around. So it just gives you that kind of extra support instead of just sort of loosely just kind of wobbling your arm around. It gives you an anchor point and allows you to kind of loosen everything else up. So instead of trying to go, or oftentimes I'll see people try this. Instead of doing that, you end up with this. So my thumb stays solid, but everything else kind of around it loosens up and allows for a nice and precise vibrato. So yeah, that's a super important one. It might feel a little bit weird at first if you're not used to doing that, but I promise you with just a little bit of practice, it's gonna seriously improve your slide playing. Tip number 4 is specifically for the gigging musicians or just anyone who stands up playing guitar often, and that is raise your strap height. You may have noticed that guys like Derek Trucks and Sonny Landreth wear their guitars a little bit on the higher side, and they do it for a reason. So this is an example of what I would consider to be too low of a strap height to play slide effectively. I'm not going to say it's impossible. You know, you see guys like Billy Gibbons and stuff who wear their guitars pretty low, who still are great slide players, but if you really want to play with a lot of precision, then this is not the best way to do it. And the main reason, once again, ties back to that slide hand positioning. So the lower you have your guitar, the more you're going to have to bend your wrist in order to get the slide on the strings. Like I said for tip number 2, you always want to have your wrist be as straight and relaxed as possible when you're playing slide, both for comfort's sake and for just having better control. And wearing your guitar low like this just doesn't really allow for that. You kind of have to be in this sort of bent wrist positioning here, and it just makes things harder. And especially if you play way up here, it just makes things really, really uncomfortable. Something like this is perfect if you ask me. It's not too high. You don't have to go Beatles level or anything. You can just be in this nice kind of medium to like slightly medium high-ish sort of positioning. How I personally know that I'm in that kind of sweet spot for the height is if my right arm is at a 90-degree angle when I'm kind of playing here. If it's more than a 90-degree angle, then it's probably too low, and if it's less than 90 degrees, it's probably too high. So that's where I like to have it, and being at this height allows for my wrist to pretty much always be nice and straight and relaxed whenever I'm playing slide. So yeah, that higher height just feels way, way better and allows me to play better slide. So if you're someone who's planning on playing a lot of slide standing up, then I would highly suggest raising that strap height a little bit if you wear it on the lower side. All right, so finally for tip number 5, this is gonna be probably the most unique thing that we talk about in this video, and I've never really heard anyone mention this before when talking about playing slide. Tip number 5 is don't just move the slide horizontally, move it vertically as well. When it comes to slide, obviously everyone knows that it requires you to move the slide up and down the neck this way, right? But no one ever really talks about moving the slide this way as you play, and especially as you transfer across strings. Instead of just always keeping the slide in sort of one centralized position, kind of centered over all 6 strings, like this, for example. So instead of just keeping it in the same spot sort of this way, it can actually help you be more precise and especially help you not fret out if you move the slide around this way in accordance to which string you're playing. So that might look more like this. Really pay attention to where the slide is positioned over the strings when I play. Notice how when I was playing those high strings, I had the slide way up here, kind of almost hanging off the edge of the fretboard. And then when I went to play the low E string, I had it way down here like this. Even if your slide is long enough to cover all 6 strings and have some room left over, I would still suggest that you do this. Basically, the way that I approach this is to always have the tip of my slide finger positioned roughly over whichever string I'm playing. Of course, I'm a pinky slide player, so if I take the slide off my pinky here and kind of just imagine that I still had the slide on, basically what I'm doing is if I'm playing the high E string, then the tip of my pinky finger is over kind of the B or high E string area. And then if I'm playing, say, on the D string, then I move the slide down so that the tip of my finger is roughly over that D string. And then, of course, going all the way down to the low E string, if I'm playing down there, I'm not just leaving the slide kind of up here in this area, I'm actually bringing it lower down here to the low E string. So my pinky finger is right over that low E string with the slide on. So the tip of my finger inside the slide is always staying kind of around the area of whichever string I'm playing. And there are two main reasons why I feel like this is really helpful. First of all, it helps you just see what you're doing better. This is especially true on the higher strings. Let's say I have the slide in this kind of like neutral middle of the fretboard position here, and I want to play something on the B and G strings. So it's still perfectly doable, right? But I can't really exactly see where the slide is positioned over those two strings specifically. When I'm looking down at the fretboard here, I can see where the slide is over the low E string, for example, but I can't see exactly what I'm doing specifically on the B and G strings. Whereas if I play that same thing with the slide kind of moved up more like this, I see exactly where the slide is contacting those specific strings. So it really allows me to be as precise as possible with my intonation because, at least for me personally, of course, intonation is a lot to do with your ear, but it also is a very visual thing as well. I'm looking at where the slide is positioned over each fret. And so having the slide kind of move to the specific string you're playing allows you to see that better. The other benefit is that it allows you to be more precise with your touch with the slide. In other words, it gives you more control over how much pressure you're pushing down on the strings with the slide, which makes you less likely to fret out. This is true with any string that you're playing on, but it's especially useful on those higher strings because just in general, those are the ones you're going to be the most likely to fret out on when you're playing, say, that high E string or B string. It's just inherently easier to fret out on those higher strings. But I think a lot of people also have issues with fretting out because they are not paying attention to this kind of slide positioning vertically. If you think about it, the way that you're controlling the amount of pressure you're pushing down with the slide is essentially with this kind of motion right here. The more you push down like this, the more pressure is going to be put on the strings and the more likely you are to fret out. And just in general, when we're using our hands for anything, we have a lot more control and precision with the tips of our fingers than we do, say, this part of our finger. You're not really going to be doing any kind of precise task with your hands with these kind of lower parts of your fingers here. And so that also is going to apply to the slide. If you have the slide just kind of in this neutral position here, not moving it up to these high strings like this, then you're controlling the amount of pressure you're putting down on those higher strings with this area of the slide here, which is going to be less precise than if you have the slide up here like this, where you're actually controlling the amount of pressure that your fingertip is pushing down on the strings. It's just much easier to find that kind of pressure sweet spot with the slide and just be more delicate with your touch when you have the slide kind of moved up here like this on these high strings. And it also applies to the low strings as well. I mean, naturally, you're already going to be kind of having your, tip of your finger down here anyway if you're playing like this. But what you can do is actually kind of angle the slide forward a little bit and kind of get an extra little bit of precision on those kind of lower strings here when you're playing. So I'm kind of tilting the slide forward like this a little bit. And I feel like that gives you a little bit more precision, a little bit more control, and makes you less likely to get kind of a rattly sort of sound with the slide on those low strings. So yeah, super underrated tip that I don't hear anyone ever talk about. Move your slide vertically while you're playing. And that's it. So those are 5 tips that you can try out right now that will almost certainly improve your slide playing noticeably. Of course, there are tons and tons of other factors. I'm not saying that these are the only things that you can do to improve your playing. Of course, there's all kinds of stuff to do with the right hand and string dampening and things like that, and just tons and tons of other little nuances to playing slide. But still, I feel like these specific things are just going to help out anyone no matter what style of slide they're playing and no matter what finger they're putting the slide on. They're just universal things that are going to make anyone's slide playing better. Let me know in the comments down below if these tips helped you out. and if you have any other tips to give people for playing slide. Don't forget that my new Modern Slide Guitar course bundle is on sale for 50% off until the end of this week, and my individual courses are on sale for 35% off. Links in the description down below. If you could please like, comment, subscribe, and click the bell notification icon to get notified whenever I post new videos. It truly does help out my channel a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you next time.